If you want to learn how to dance with your unconscious, then you need look no further than the essays and clinical case studies of Carl Jung himself. Throughout his decades of writing and throughout the collected works, there are these rare insights into the exceedingly special individual who could express symbolically and subconsciously the archetypal stories of their life and the collective life through bodily movement, not just the cerebral, active imagination and parts work which we're used to exploring in the Jungian space, but the body-based approach. Carl Jung noted as far back as 1916 that although this type of person was exceedingly rare, they seemed to have a deeper and potentially more genuine understanding of the unconscious because they lived it physically, not just imaginally. But again, where are these rare people? Well, in this episode of Inner Work Essentials, we're going to be diving into the work of authentic movement. This is a wonderful, highly valued essay collection of maybe 50 different essays from the field, which roughly came to be in the 1960s and has gradually hummed beneath the surface and maybe beyond your attention field for far too long. But for me, I have a personal bias why I want to bring this information in. As you can see, I did my own authentic movement and somatic active imagination for a period of probably 5 or 6 months. For 5 or 6 months, I was taken into this place of wanting to express and heal unresolved childhood trauma through movement. I had had an athletic background. I was into weightlifting. I'd done some gymnastics, some powerlifting, different types of calisthenics and different primal movements. I was a very physically active man, but I'd never danced. I never grew up with that feeling that it was okay for me to dance, and yet here I am doing very strange movements, very contemporary style movements, but not in a choreographed, intentional, let's get good at dancing sense. I'm mostly showing some of the more aesthetically pleasing versions on the screen now, but a lot of the movements were very small. They were very subtle. They're what Peter Levine calls the incomplete gesture finding completion, the somatic therapy where if you were hit by a car, for example, you'd naturally want to go like this. There's the somatic therapy route, but when it comes to the Jungian dance therapy route, there's a mixture of that personal story, the shielding from the car crash or the shielding from the situation that we didn't want to be a part of, mixed with an archetypal energy. This is the realm where astrological symbols or gods and goddesses come in through movement. It's a really strange place to exist in. I'm not recommending it for most people, but if the kind of person, and especially for men who are very cerebrally locked up, they've got a heavy intellect, to bring that energy down and to get into the body and clear out from a physical, sensory place all of those expressions that we were never allowed to express, or at our best, projected onto women that we found attractive who would hold our shadows for us. This is a hugely liberating process. It will challenge certain ideas about what it means to be a man, especially if you're in a vulnerable, tender position where you're spending time curled up in a ball or doing very worm-like, potentially pathetic-looking movements. This is why you can do it in private. For this video, I am merely going to extend an invitation into authentic movement as a valid field of study for you. I'm going to target this video specifically towards individuals who don't naturally live through bodily expression. This is not for the salsa or ballet dancer who's been in their body for 20 years plus. They already know what it feels like to act an archetype or to tell a story with their body. This video is for the more intellectually based individual. This is basically the video which I wish I probably had access to about 3 or 4 years ago when I needed permission to get into my body in a form that felt risky, that felt edgy. It felt edgy to imagine going out into the woods in a semi-private location and bearing myself to let the movements happen. Because that's the core of authentic movement. That's the core of dancing with your unconscious, in the same way that within an active imagination internal dialogue, we don't try and control the outcome because it's a relational process between the self and a part, or the self and an archetype. When it comes to authentic movement, we don't try to control the outcome of a gesture or a series of gestures. It just happens. Sometimes we have to get out of our head. It's a good idea to get grounded with some basic primal movements, some deep squats, some jumps, some stretches, some general athleticism to just get in the body. But once the song is there, and some practitioners would even suggest doing it without music, the movement tends to come through. For some people, it's going to be a pushing or a pulling, but stylistically so, it might be this. It could be a drawing in, and of course it represents either an unexpressed childhood need, an archetypal gesture of some sort beyond their comprehension, or maybe the space in between, especially if you have a practice that lasts for many months. But let's return back to the book just for a moment to introduce the field more broadly with a wonderful encapsulating quote from about 400 pages of wonderful, truly well-written, truly soulful material. If you're into Jungian parts work, if you've read some Jung, if you've read some James Hillman, some Robert Johnson, some Marie-Louise von Franz, some Marion Woodman, James Hollis, if you've read any of these Jungian style approaches, Robert Moore, there's another one, all of these wonderful authors, and you haven't taken it to the body-based approach and perspective, just listen to this. This is a quote from, I don't know who wrote this quote, it's in the essay collection, actually, I can check. It's a quote from Wendy Wyman McGinty. The Body in Analysis, Authentic Movement and Witnessing in Analytic Practice. It's a clinical book, but it's very soulful. Quote from the book: what is authentic movement? What is this field of Jungian dance therapy? Just beyond my experience and what I'm sharing here. Authentic movement, as a form of active imagination, supports the emergence of unconscious material at a somatic level and contributes to a greater understanding of the formation of some of the defense mechanisms. Working with the somatic aspect of symbol formation, the physical aspect of the imagination, in particular with the process of linking feeling to a mental image, it's a crucial endeavor in authentic movement so that what was previously experienced only on a somatic level can begin to be taken up into the mind, thought about, and eventually integrated. And then she continues into the role of the witness in authentic movement proper, which is a facilitated therapeutic work. This would be a 1-hour session where someone is the dancer and someone is the witness. So for example, if you and I were working together, you might be the dancer and I might be the witness, and it's my job to merely witness. I don't speak with you. I don't interact with you. Some practitioners are as extreme to even go through a full 1-hour process, maybe a process where tears come and anger comes and various flailings and quite shocking material expresses. And then the timer goes off and it's, thank you, I'll see you next week. No interpretation at all, no analysis, no dream unraveling, no dissecting of the imagery, just letting it happen and letting it express, and then maybe 5 weeks later you'll talk about it as the pattern emerges. It's quite a radical way of doing things. I think in the general sense of what authentic movement tries to offer, it's a place where the body and the mind and the imaginal and the spiritual and soulful get an opportunity to come through in a safe container where there's an opportunity to be presented, but not dissected. It's an opportunity for something to be brought up as an idea, to kind of be creatively played with without the immediate fear of it being jumped upon. But what do we do if we don't want to take a therapeutic approach and work with a professional? Well, that's actually the approach that I did myself. It's doing it on your own. I got to the stage where I enjoyed filming my authentic movement sessions. I'd put the camera down for a song that I really resonated with, and I'd see the gestures that I forgot during the actual dancing and the actual expression. I mentioned in a previous video in this series that there was one gesture in particular that always came back to me, And it completely escaped all of my sit-down journaling, dream analysis kind of work in the first year or so of my genuine healing commitment. It was this gesture. I've shown it before, so maybe you've seen it, but it was this. It was, I can't really fake it emotionally, but something like this. It was a pouring from the heart, or occasionally a receiving into the heart. This gesture appeared again and again, while standing, while kneeling, while lying on the floor, always a pouring and a receiving, and of course, it doesn't take a genius in symbolic interpretation or childhood trauma to understand what's going on there. But it was important for me to express. There's only so much mouth movement and vocal utterance that could capture that feeling of pouring from the heart. There's only so much physical embracing and holding myself, or being in those more symbolically self-holding spaces, that could possibly substitute the gesture of giving and receiving to a place that was hurting. It's the inner child, it's the lover, it's the maiden, it's the king. It's all different archetypes coming together, not just those in particular. That same gesture, that same principle, in my case as an example, had many elements of expression. And this might sound so far out there for you right now, but my invitation is to just stay with it for a little moment longer. In the same way that when you get a big dream, a dream about someone close to you and then something happens in ordinary life, or a dream about someone at the other side of the world, or maybe a past-based dream where you're unraveling a certain pattern and realize, wow, that's what that meant. It's that same sense of revelation that comes through with the physical. Someone who's used to dancing, usually this is women by and large, they're used to having that shadow or that role, that element of human society as their domain. Men tend to be quite happy to not be the dancer and then overproject onto the feminine dancer that they have a romantic shadow projection all about. That's a story for a different video. Women tend to be a lot more intuitive about this. When I've worked with female clients, some amazing things have happened. There have been instances of witnessing and also hearing stories of private processes where the inner child at various ages, from 5 to 10 to 15, or the future archetype, the golden shadow, comes through, and these women dance with their past and their future in a way to integrate in the middle. How magical is that? It's non-rational, but it's not pre-rational. It's post-rational. It's tapping into a higher sense of intuition, and it's allowing the body to express in that rare way that Carl Jung sometimes encountered, where someone could symbolically speak through gesture and motility alone. There's no need for a word. In the same way that perhaps 60% of human communication is non-verbal, what if the unconscious were the same way? What if we wore our unconscious on our skin, and what if our very movements betrayed the stories which are trying to come through? It's an invitation for you to consider, and I highly, highly recommend that after this video, or maybe sometime this week, at the very least, put on one song which you really resonate with. An emotional song which reminds you of grief or sadness or joy or optimism, a strong emotion, perhaps rage, and let your body speak. Let your body have a voice. It's been silenced for far too long, and just be curious about what happens, and don't place that self-censoring judgment over your own expression for any longer. I'm going to leave it there for this video. Check on out the next episode of Inner Work Essentials, which I think is on sexuality. I'm not quite sure because I've yet to organize those, but you'll see right here, and we'll figure it out together regardless. It's going to lead on quite nicely from this episode because all these episodes are structured with intention. I just simply can't remember right now, but it's right there on the screen, and I'll see you over there.